Hey guys, it's Melissa with Anita Goodesign, and I'm here today to show you an awesome new project that we have that just came out. We are going to be making these adorable little ornaments. Now, these are different than how we normally do it because they have a backside too that is different than the front. Now, there are 6 different designs in the collection. Each one has a front and back, so there's 3 finished ornaments. We got a cute little gingerbread guy here. Check him out. We are going to be stitching the cute little red stocking. I have 2 up here, one example for me and one for you guys to see. And then we also have this adorable little Christmas wreath. So very cute, and they're done with this felt fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in and show you guys how we are going to stitch one of these little ornaments for your upcoming holiday season. So the first step in doing this design is, of course, to load it into your machine. So I have my design pulled up, and since this has 2 file parts, we want to make sure that you are doing the back side first, which for me, that's labeled 1A, and then there will be a 1B. So we're going to go ahead and do that A file first. So in this case, it's the one without the snowflakes on it. So I have that up and ready on my machine screen. The next part is that we need to hoop our stabilizer. Now this is a freestanding ornament that's going to get finished with a satin stitch. So I am hooping a piece of tearaway stabilizer. Now this is an awesome stabilizer choice for designs that are freestanding, since when it's finished, we'll just tear it right out. So I went ahead and I have this hooped here, and we're gonna go ahead and load the hoop into the machine. Nice and easy. One of the best tricks people forget, make sure you lock your hoop in so that the button will turn green when I lower my foot. So we're gonna go ahead and start that first step, which for me on the screen, it's going to be a little outline box to show you exactly where the design is going to be positioned within the hoop. So we go ahead and start that. Now I'm running it in white thread, that way it'll match what base fabric I use, but remember this step is just a placement, so you can use whatever color you really want. So it's gonna run around and draw my little rectangular box. And you'll notice the design does have a shape, and we'll make that shape later. So first you're going to be working with this nice little closed-in rectangle. So I'm going to go ahead and pull it out to show you how I line up my fabric on it. So we have our placement stitch here, and I am going to use a piece of white felt as the base material. That way it has a nice and simple color as the background. Don't have to worry about what it looks like. I'm going to go ahead and use 2 pieces of tape. And we're going to run the next machine step, which is going to be a basting stitch, which is a little different than a tack down. And I'll explain why we use that instead. So we slide our hoop back in, smooth everything out there, and we go ahead and hit go on the next step. So the point of this step is, since it is a basting, the stitches are going to be set wider apart. Now the reason we do that is because the stitch isn't permanent, so you guys can actually take this out later when we are getting towards the end of the design. I'll walk you through that part when we get to it. And since it's also a basting stitch, it only goes around 1 time, when traditional tack downs would go around twice. So we have our little basting stitch. Since our fabric is secure, I can go ahead and take off that tape. Now, the next part of the design is a placement stitch, showing us where the main shape of this little stocking is going to go. So I'm going to go ahead, I have the white already in there, so I'm going to go ahead and load that anyway, and then I'll show you exactly where to lay the red fabric. So again, we're working with felt. It's a great material to use in ornament designs because it doesn't fray very easily, and it gives it a nice, clean, and soft look to it. So we have our placement stitch running. Let my machine do its finished cut, and then we go ahead and pull it out so we can lay the fabric down. Now I know I ran it in white. You should be able to kind of see the outline there of that stocking. So then I take my red fabric. Now if you're using applique fabric that has a pattern or it's cotton, just remember you need to place it right side facing up. But since we're using the felt, we're just going to go ahead and lay it over the design. And if you have a lot of felt, you can kind of corner it in the design too. Save some fabric. I know we all love to do that. And stick the hoop back into the machine. And lock it in. And then from there, we're going to run the tacking stitch. Since this design has red felt on it, I'm going to go ahead and change my thread to red. We'll just set that one aside because we'll come back to it later. And then I have this red. So I go ahead, do my lightning speed threading for you guys. There we go. So now we have thread that matches, and I'm going to just hit go on that next step, which will be that tacking step for that felt. And I always like to kind of guide the fabric with my hands as well. Just keep your fingers away from the path of the needle. No one wants to have a needle go through their hand. There we go. And like I mentioned earlier, with a tacking stitch, it's going to go around 2 times. That way the fabric is nice and secure to the design, which is different than that basting stitch from earlier. This does a little curly Q in my stocking right there, and it's going to finish that tacking stitch right at the top. Now we get to the fun part of applique, which is the cutting. So I wait for the machine to finish, and I'm going to go ahead and pull it out. From here, I'm going to scoot on over so I can do some trimming. We take our scissors. Now, when we do applique, I highly recommend you guys invest in a nice curved tip pair. Those are my preference for cutting, and what pretty much everyone here at Anita likes to use. So I'm just going to go ahead and snip in so I can get to the design. And this will end up having nice decorative stitches around it when it's finished. So when we're trimming, we can actually trim all the way to the tacking stitch line. So you don't have to leave any seam allowance or certain pieces there. Get that curve going, and we have a nice little zigzag at the top. When I do those, I just like to snip into them, and it kind of cuts it right where you need it. There we go. And then the fun part around the curve. So again, the reason I like these curved tip scissors is they work best when you have shapes that are more organic. Helps you get right up into the turn. Bear with me while I trim the little tiny detail in here. And almost got it. Right there. All right. So I've pulled that piece off. Even my cut job's not the cleanest, but it's gonna get a satin stitch over it. So as long as you got pretty close, that is the goal. Trim as close as you can without popping any of the stitches. So then we're going to take that guy and put it back into the machine. And since we've done the red part of the stocking, the next part on my screen shows the green parts. So I'll show again the little example. We're doing the back. So now it's gonna do the top and the bottom of the stocking. So since we're changing felt colors, I'm gonna go ahead and don't do what I just did, cut your thread and pull it from the bottom. For practice purposes, I pulled it the wrong way. All right, so then I have my green, a really long piece of green. There we go. Thread up my machine so that we have a matching color, and that you guys can see this placement stitch this time. So once I have my thread in there, I'm gonna go ahead and hit go for the next step, which is the placement. And again, it's going to have those 2 little green parts to it. Now they're linked in the same step, so when I stitch this out, it's going to put a placement for both pieces. And my favorite thing, if you have enough fabric, just cut a piece that you can lay over the whole design, and then you don't have to worry about positioning it perfectly. But I have some handy helpers that have already done that for me. So if you're running on scraps, you can cut some pieces that are perfectly sized for the space, or you can lay some right over top. So I have my 2 placement stitches. Let the machine finish its dance. I like to call it a dance. And then we go ahead and pull that out. So then we have our 2 placement stitches at the top as well as the bottom. And we are going to take our 2 pieces of green and just lay them over the design. Now I know I have the other side of the ornament to do as well, so I'm actually going to be a little particular in how I place this. Just like that. And then if you want to use tape, you can. I'm pretty good about keeping an eye on it, but if you're one of the people who are very worried about shifting, feel free to tape away. But I'm just going to keep an eye on it. So I lay it in there, nice and smooth. Lock my hoop, and then make sure my placement stitches are all covered. So once it looks good to go, just keep an eye on it so nothing shifts around weird. But felt tends to kind of cling to itself too. It's another good reason to use felt in little project designs. And again, it's going to go around both of those spaces 2 times since it's a tack down. So we got the top piece finished right here, and it's going to go down to my little bottom of the heel of the stocking. Then the fun part comes is some decoration on those edges after this. Such a cute little stocking, looks like a little elf stocking. These are fun for the holiday season, and you know that Christmas is coming up around the corner, and I know we all have a lot of extra time at home. So this is a great, quick and easy project you can do alone or with kids too. So now I have my greens tacked down in place. I'm going to go ahead again with my curved applique scissors and trim that. Get a little closer for you guys so you can see what I'm doing. All right, and then go ahead and get the top. Then turn it so I don't have to cut at a weird angle for you. And again, this one has those little triangles, so you gotta snip out the little triangles in the zigzag pattern. There we go. So now we have those pieces. Let me clean up this one cut just a little bit. Perfect. So I have my little stocking. I'm going to lay it down in the machine. Make sure I get my hoop in there. And then scoot on back for you. So after we've done that, I'm going to go ahead and properly take my thread off the machine. We're going to go ahead and snip it at the top, pull it through, and then go ahead and change colors. So the next step, according to the design on screen, is the satin stitch. So this is where I'm going to pick whatever color matches the main part it's running around. So in this case, the step is about to run the satin stitches on the main part of the stocking. Since my stocking is red on the main part, we're going to use a red thread. So go ahead, grab my thread, whip it in there, nice and quick. And then we get to run our satin stitch. So we go ahead and hit go. And it's going to do this fun little back and forth stitch, really tight zigzag. And what that's going to do is give a clean finish to the felt that is the red applique on here. So as it goes around, it tends to do more than one pass of sort of like a tack down stitch. That way it's making sure it's nice and secure. And then it goes back to the top and does its zigzag all the way through. So we do have to wait for it to do this stitch, but we're going to let it run its little zigzag pattern. And like I mentioned, these are great for holiday preparation season. Everyone's probably staying home with a Christmas tree. We got those 3 different ornaments that have 6 designs total, the front and the back. So these would make a great gift as well. Or just hang them up on the mantle as decor. Very cute. So it's going around the curve of the stocking. Another important tip is always make sure before you start you have a full bobbin, because when it's running satin stitches, we're using a lot of that bobbin thread. And the last thing you want is for the design to stop and say, hey, you're out of bobbin, you have to fix it. So once it's done one side of the stocking, it did, where is it? This inner edge right here. It's now finishing the curly Q as a separate part. So it kind of goes in sections, that way it can circle back and tack down nice and secure before it runs that zigzag pattern. And essentially that is what a satin stitch is a really tight zigzag. So if you didn't know, now you know. Very cute. While that one's running, look at these cute little guys. So I have some more detail for you guys if you can take a look at those. I like his little back jumpsuit. And again, you can have fun with these. You can make them any color you want. Definitely use a gingerbread cookie, but if you're feeling sugar cookie, you could pick a different color felt for him. You could also give him a pink jumpsuit instead of green. So you can change it up however you want. And this is a fun one that kids, like I mentioned, could help you stitch out. Get a little creative in the materials. And they're all fairly simple to do, as you're seeing now. So applique is one of the best projects to get other people involved. And we are almost done. with that satin stitch along the side of the stocking. So next, my machine tells me is going to be the gold dots. So again, in the back design, we have these little bells. They look like bells on the stocking trim. So I'm going to use a fun metallic thread here. And go ahead and trim. And pull my tail out the bottom. From here, I'm going to go ahead and take my metallic. And we're just going to put it on the thread spool, same way we do with regular thread. I get asked all the time questions about metallic, and we use the same needle that we do with regular thread. And we're going to try it at the same full speed too, because this design is fairly simple, and they've been digitized to run just fine. So we're going to go ahead and hit go on our metallic. Yep, there it is. Making sure it's running in the right spot. That's always important too. So it starts with my little outside bell. And I think there is 4 at the top it's going to do, as well as 1 at the bottom, like a little pom-pom. So you guys can see that. Very cute. And I have some other fun tips for that metallic thread. So a lot of times people mention it breaks on them. I learned one of the first times I had ever used metallic at Anita Goodesign, I learned a secret tip about the freezer. Now, if you've not heard that trick before, I was taught that you can actually take your spools of metallic thread and stick them in the freezer door. Keep it in the door and not the back of the freezer so it doesn't get too cold or icy. But chilling them will actually help them run really smooth in the machine. So it keeps it from coiling up and getting knotty. So that cold helps keep the tensile strength strong as well, so it unwinds nice and clean. So you can definitely find more tips and tricks on metallic. Another one, of course, is slowing the machine down. If you think you're running a lot of metallic and it's breaking on you a little too much, it could be either a tension problem or just it's running too fast. But with these simple dots that we have going on here, I'm running the machine at full speed and it's doing just fine. So we are on the last little bell on the tip of the stocking here, so I was checking out. All right, now that we've finished up with those metallic bells, we're going to go ahead and run the rest of the embroidery that's in the design, and then when it finishes up with that embroidery, we'll stop and we'll come back so you guys can follow along. All right, so we're back. We have finished the back of this first file for that stocking. This was the 1A file that we just finished up. I went ahead and I unhooped it, and I took a pair of scissors and trimmed around the box that we saw that outlined in the beginning. Now, I left about a 1/2 inch seam allowance there, so you don't want to trim too tight because we're going to end up using that outline basting stitch to line up the 2 files later. So then in my machine, what I've gone ahead to do is I loaded the second file, which is the 1B, and I went ahead and already stitched it out all the way to the second to last step. So they were created almost exactly the same with a base fabric that is the white felt, our appliques, and then some decorative stitching. All right, so with that front file stitched out up to the second to last step, we are going to add the file that we stitched first to the back side of the hoop. Now this one's done a little differently than how we do ornaments because instead of having to turn a design, we are going to apply this right side facing us onto the back. So before we lay our piece, we don't want to forget our string. This does make a cute little ornament. So you can actually cut the string however long you decide. I'm just going to do a couple inches here like this and make a loop out of it. So from there, we're going to take our little string, line it up at the top of the ornament, and I pulled the little tails just past the green part of the stocking to make sure that I know it catches. Take a small piece of tape. I'm actually going to take a really small piece of tape and just kind of secure it in there. You can choose to use tape or you can choose not to. It will be finished off into the design. I like to add some tape just to make sure it doesn't shift around in there. And then to place this file, what we're going to do is a fun tip that one of our seamstresses mentioned to us for perfect alignment. So we take some straight pins and we're going to take that A file that we did before and we're going to put a pin directly in the corner of that basting stitch box that we had in the outline before. We then take the pin and we're going to line it up on the back side of the hoop with the corner of the other basting stitch box. So now my 2 stockings should line up. And remember, we have the 4 corners. So I'm going to pin at the diagonals first. Make sure it's nice and straight there. And then add 2 more. So again, this is a great way if you have an outside placement, tacking, or even basting stitch in any design, and you're putting files together like that, pins are a great way to make sure it's nice and aligned. But like with any embroidery machine, we don't want pins directly in the way of where things are going to stitch. So what I'm going to do is use that to line up the 2 designs, and then I'm going to take some tape and secure the felt in place. And then we'll remove the pins. We don't even have to worry about the pins at that point. Got some extra long tape. I'm actually going to tape both sides just to make sure it's secure. So then I tape my left and my right. And then once you've taped it down, you want to make sure you remember to remove the pins. We don't want those on the bottom of the hoop when we're putting it in the machine. But now, since I've taped it in place, everything should not shift at all. It should stay right where it's at. So with my pins removed, I'm going to go ahead and make sure my tape is nice and sticky. You have your ribbon in there, so we are ready to run the next step. We're going to guide it when we put it back into the machine with our hand so that you can lay the fabric and the applique on the back nice and smooth. That way it doesn't get all bunched up when you push the hoop into the machine. So I line it up, check the bottom with my hand, and then just glide it into the machine and lock it in place. So now we're going to go ahead and run that second to last step. I have already put white thread in my machine so that it will be kind of invisible there. And we're going to go ahead and run the tacking step. So what this is going to do is we have a top thread and we have a bobbin thread. So that bobbin, or the bottom thread, is going to catch and secure that back piece of fabric to the main design. So now you're getting stitches from the top and the bottom to secure your 2 pieces of fabric. Makes a nice little sandwich. And again, this one's a tacking stitch, so it's going to go around 2 times to make sure the designs are joined together. So we'll go ahead and let that finish. And then from here, once we have the back, we are going to go ahead and look at that basting stitch I mentioned before. So we're going to go ahead and set it down. And I have a little seam ripper here that I'm going to use. Now, we're going to want to trim tight to that line so that the file is isolated and it can go around it with a satin stitch. So we got to get rid of all this excess felt. And since it's stitched down with a basting stitch, we can't just cut right through it. So in order to get to the design, we're going to use a little seam ripper. My best technique method for you is just lift the edge, pop the stitch, and then your seam ripper will slice right through. And I just run it all the way around. Make sure we get all those out. And you can be kind of quick with it. And then remember, we also have the one on the back. So while I'm trimming the front, I'm going to go ahead and flip it over. We see that our design was tacked down, so we can go ahead and remove this extra tape. So now that we see the back, we're going to go ahead and trim to the design. Take our scissors. Since I flipped it over, we already have that tacking stitch to follow. And we are going to just trim around the stocking on the back. Get in the curve there. Always remember to turn your hoop. It's better to turn it than to try and fight directions. And make sure you get all of that out of there. And also, when you're cutting on the back, this is why I do the back first, is make sure you don't cut off your ribbon. So when you're trimming, lift the fabric away and then just watch the tips of your scissors. I also like to hold whatever it is out of the way with my hand if I can. And just remember to trim a little bit better than I'm currently doing. But you want to cut all the way to that line. All right. So with that side trimmed, we're going to then flip it back over. and trim out the front. Okay. Cut along the edge there. Get inside the curve of the stocking. I think would be the hardest part of the design to trim within, but it's not even that bad. You just gotta turn when you're trimming. So then, with both sides cut out, it's going to look kind of like that. And you'll notice you don't see the string from the front side, it is still on the back. So then what I'm going to do is, remember it's a freestanding design, so from home you're gonna wanna wind a bobbin that matches the color you're using. And I already have that in my machine. Since we're doing a white satin stitch, we can just use the white bobbin. So in this case, slide it in. Make sure I head to the next step, and it's ready to go. So I'm just gonna lower my foot, and we're going to run that finishing satin stitch. All right. So again, with that satin stitch, it's going to go in there for that zigzag and do a little outline of it first, and then finish off the stitch. Okay, so our satin stitch has finished up on the design. We're going to go ahead and pull it out of the machine. And when I started this step right before we ran that satin stitch, I went ahead and added a little piece of tape over this ribbon here. That way it wouldn't get stuck within the machine. So you can go ahead and take off the tape. And then the design is run on tearaway. So at this point, we can just grab our design. I like to give it a little poke with my finger and then gently tear it out of the stabilizer. All right, and there is our finished little stocking. So cute, you guys. So if you're wanting to get your hands on this project, definitely go ahead and check it out. You can find it at anitagoodesign.com and just type in Christmas ornament and it should pop up for you guys. And remember, there's 3 different ones in this collection. So I hope you enjoyed stitching this project with me, and we'll see you guys next time.